Welcome to episode 228 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Frank Figliuzzi, who served in the FBI for 25 years. Frank was the FBI's Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, and in this episode, he reviews the Bureau's National Security Branch, its role in the U.S. intelligence community, and the 7 C's of the FBI's core values from his book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. During his FBI career, Frank held senior FBI leadership positions. His FBI highlights include leading efforts to counter economic espionage in Silicon Valley, California, and overseeing financial crimes and public corruption investigations in Miami, Florida, and Cleveland, Ohio. Frank also directed an FBI internal disciplinary unit in the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, and adjudicated allegations of serious misconduct involving FBI personnel. He was appointed the FBI's chief inspector by former FBI Director Robert Mueller, overseeing sensitive internal inquiries, shooting reviews, and performance audits. As the Bureau's head of counterintelligence, Frank directed all espionage investigations across the U.S. government. Currently, Frank is a respected national security analyst appearing weekly on live television for NBC News and MSNBC. You can learn more about Frank and his book at frankfigliuzzi.com. I learned a lot during this episode. Frank and I talked about being in the FBI as it transitioned from primarily a law enforcement agency into a intelligence-driven agency focused on national security, and what it was like to witness that change up close and personal. We also talked briefly about the FBI's OPR disciplinary system and the FBI's inspections as they relate to the FBI's core values. I have to admit that I sometimes felt that FBI management was like, a critical parent, and FBI agents have the reputation of behaving well, not just because they're good people, but also because they're afraid of the consequences. I need to explore that more with Frank one day. Maybe not on the podcast, but in a blog post. I usually introduce my blog post and personal thoughts in my monthly reader team emails before I add them to my website. That's my segue to invite you to join my reader team, where once a month I keep you up to date on the FBI in books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, I'll send you my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 60 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. And you'll also get my FBI reality checklist of 20 misconceptions about the FBI. There's a link to where you can join my reader team in your podcast app's description of this episode. There's also a link where you can find my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. Have you noticed that there are no ads on FBI Retired Case File Review? Well, that's on purpose. Instead of running ads or having a Patreon account, I ask that you support the show by purchasing my books, available as ebooks, audiobooks, and print books wherever books are sold. So thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, Frank Figliuzzi. Hey, Frank, how are you?
Jerry, I'm well. I'm glad that we could do this. We've been talking about this for a while now, and we finally are doing it.
Yes, and I can tell you I'm a little mad at you because your book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, is packed with stuff that we could talk about today.
And that makes you angry?
Yes, because we don't have all day long to talk.
True. But we can do it again.
I hope so, because as an FBI agent, I am absolutely interested in talking about the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, and the inspection process in the FBI, because those always made every agent a little nervous. You don't have to be guilty to be nervous when you hear the words OPR or inspection, but we're not going to talk about those today. So maybe we can hit those up another time. But I could not miss out on the opportunity to talk to you about counterintelligence, especially since, for a time you were the nation's top spy catcher.
Yeah, Jerry, one of the things I'm looking forward to the conversation, number one, because I'm passionate about national security and counterintelligence specifically, but also I think the nation has just been so eager to learn more about the counterintelligence threat, because over the last 4 years or so, it's become very real to them in terms of the fact that we still have adversaries. We still get up every day with people trying to hurt us, and we still have agents and officers who get up out of bed every day trying to prevent adversaries from harming our democracy.
That is absolutely true. But I guess the issue is, there's this phrase in the FBI, need to know. And even as an FBI agent, now retired, when I worked criminal matters, I really didn't have the need to know a lot about what was happening on the intelligence side. So I probably know as much about specific cases as the public does. And so there's always been this secrecy that comes along when you talk about intelligence, but you're going to break down what you can for us today.
I am. And I like that phrase, need to know, because not only is it a reality inside the FBI, as you said, there's no need to know, from one squad to the next, the sensitive things that are going on. It's a security measure. But today in the society we live in, I think there is an increasing need to know for the public about the nature of the threat and how we work it. So yeah, let's talk about what we can. And the FBI was kind enough to approve in pre-publication review for my book some things that have never been discussed publicly before. So we can talk about those as well.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, especially because you actually started your career working counterintelligence. So you're going to be able to, as we talk about the overall counterintelligence program, we are actually going to be able to do some case reviews also to give people a better understanding of how everything works.
Yeah, you're right. And it was pretty neat to start my career in counterintelligence, develop a love for it, and then even after having worked and supervised completely different matters, end up heading up counterintelligence at the end of my career. So it's interesting. I saw a lot of transition and change in the world and in how we do counterintelligence. But, the old cliche, as much as things change, they remain the same. So lots of things about the threat are still the same.
All right. Before we get into it, I do want to let everybody know that the underthread of everything that we're going to talk about is the fact that there is a code of excellence that is required for all employees of an agency that is assigned to protect the security of the United States. And so after we talk about counterintelligence, after we do the case reviews, then we're going to talk about the code of excellence and what you've broken down into the 7 C's in the code of excellence.
Yeah, I wrote this book, and we'll talk about it. I wrote this book because I think the public needs to know how incredibly strong the sense of code, core values, and self-policing exists within the FBI. And as you said, it's essential because the FBI lives and dies by its brand, its reputation, its credibility, and anybody in any team leadership position can learn some things about how the FBI operates at a high degree of excellence when the stress is the strongest by simply applying some of these 7 C's from within the Bureau.
Okay, so now that everybody knows what we're going to talk about, I guess we're going to have to go down to the basics and just kind of define what is counterintelligence.
That's a good place to start. because I think people have different ideas of what we mean when we say that. So look, the FBI by presidential executive order, I can actually name the order. It's 12333, says the FBI is the primary counterintelligence agency for the United States government. So the FBI actually oversees other agencies when it comes to investigating espionage and counterintelligence. What does that mean? Counterintelligence, very simply, is defined as efforts to detect, deter, and defeat foreign adversaries trying to harm the United States. It's the 3 Ds: detect, deter, and defeat. And we have in every one of the 56 FBI field offices, we have wholly dedicated squads of agents and analysts who come to work every day trying to do just that: identify the intelligence officers and spies working against us inside the United States, figure out how they're doing it, what they're targeting, and then make life very, very difficult for them in terms of succeeding in their mission.
Well, I know that one of the things that I recall, when I was in the FBI was that shift, that change that occurred in the different field offices. At the time, up on the second floor of the Philadelphia division, they were building out a SCIF, which for those who don't know is a sensitive, compartmented information facility. And everything involving intelligence and terrorism was going to be walled off from the rest of the office, the criminal part of the office. And, you couldn't take your cell phone in there. And all I knew was that stuff was going on in there. But that was a definite change in the way the Bureau worked national security matters. Can you tell us about that change and what it was like before and how after 9/11 and Hansen, which we're going to talk about because you have a direct story relating to him, how things changed after 2001 when these two major events in national security occurred?
Yeah, you're right. There was a very, very visible shift, even for folks within the FBI physically, as you said, as walls began to go up and SCIFs began to get built. And, that was on the CI side, it was the result of a desire to really enhance security as a part of some losses that were suffered throughout the intelligence community. Also, we finally got standardization across the intelligence community saying, look, if you're going to work this stuff, you got to have certain security standards, and they're going to include walling off and securing the folks who do this for a living from others who don't. And I remember actually welcoming those standards. But before that, when you and I began our careers, I started in Atlanta. Counterintelligence in most medium and small offices was something that was tacked on to some other squad. So, for example, in Atlanta, when I started, we had on our squad, we had civil rights, we had counterintel and counterterrorism. And I don't know, maybe earlier on, we might have even had background investigations for applicants. I can't recall that. But my point is this: we suddenly began to realize that this is a highly specialized program that requires a level of professionalism, dedication, and training, just as with agents who say work public corruption or white collar crime. It's not something that should be tacked on to some other squad and you can get to it when you can. And I think moving forward, when 9/11 occurred, the whole concept that, wait a minute, the FBI is not really just this primarily criminal investigative agency. The FBI is part of the intelligence community and the lead in counterintelligence. And if we're going to do this right, we need to have a cadre of highly trained, specialized agents and analysts that come to work every day doing just that. You shouldn't pick up an espionage case, in the morning and work an applicant background investigation in the afternoon.
Now, I know other countries have a model where there is a different agency doing criminal investigations and different agency doing intelligence, and that was introduced as a possibility for the FBI, splitting us and making it two separate organizations. What were your thoughts about that, and how were we able to convince Congress that that was not something they should do?
I have pretty strong feelings about this, and that's why I included it in my book. And I've seen and worked alongside our allies, particularly the UK and Canada, who do it very differently than we do. And even they will tell you, Jerry, especially after a couple of beers, that this doesn't work well for them. So here's the deal. And Jerry, we're even seeing renewed calls post-insurrection, January 6th at the Capitol, saying, hey, we think the FBI missed some of this, and maybe it's time they're just too big. They've got too much on their plate. Maybe it's time once again to call for splitting the FBI into some kind of domestic security agency and then a separate criminal investigative agency. And the same thing happened after 9/11 in droves. And Bob Mueller, who was director at the time, should be credited and is credited for literally saving the FBI. And not because he had some kind of special interest in keeping the organization intact, but rather he was able to prove the beauty and the strength of having one hybrid agency that wears a criminal investigative hat with power of arrest and an intelligence / counterintelligence agency. And here's kind of the simple beauty of this. When you walk into an FBI field office, you've got, say, a squad that works Russian organized crime. Maybe you've got a squad working mortgage fraud, and you've got a squad working Russian counterintelligence. The analytical cadre in that office connects all of those dots and says that criminal mortgage fraud case is being run by a Russian organized crime family that consists and is led by retired and former Russian KGB agents. And boy, you can't tell the difference anymore between a retired KGB officer and an organized criminal these days. But the connecting of the dots is so essential. And the ability to shift between intelligence, classified intelligence, and then pivot to a criminal case based on that intelligence only happens within the same agency quickly, where people are elbow to elbow and analysts are connecting those dots quickly. There have been examples, Jerry, where drug agents, some of the best intel I've seen on the counterterrorism threat is from drug agents who say, I've got a source telling me that there are terrorist training in Latin America sponsored by a drug cartel that's looking the other way because they're going to get weapons shipments from the terrorism organization in return for being allowed to secretly train in South America. Or a drug agent saying, I see a cartel is being paid to ferry a terrorist into the nation from our southern border. That kind of swift cross-hybrid intelligence happens when you have a law enforcement and intelligence agency. Let's contrast it with Canada and UK. Canada and UK have a wall up between intelligence and law enforcement. You literally have to call a cop to get somebody arrested in your espionage case. And as I tell the story in my book, we had a serious espionage case that we uncovered in Canada, wherein we told the whole story to CSIS, the internal security agency in Canada. They worked it. They said, holy cow, you're right. We have a Russian spy in our Navy. And then I thought, well, this is great. Go ahead. Let's do the arrest. Get this guy stopped. Au contraire, that's French Canadian. Au contraire, they had to go tell the RCMP, the cops, and the RCMP had to start the case all over again and independently make their case.
Wow.
Because CSIS wasn't allowed to share classified intelligence with their own police agency.
Okay, I can see how that would not work. But we just talked about how the walls were built within the offices. So even though it may not be separate organizations, how do we get past those physical walls of need to know? How does that information get from the criminal side to the intelligence side and the other way around?
Yeah, great question. And particularly post 9/11, the connectivity that occurs, that connective tissue in an office really comes in the form of the intelligence analysts. Those are the folks post 9/11 that are supposed to be driving the entire office, the program. And so what they do is they embed tactical intelligence analysts, IAs, on every squad so that they are the eyes and ears, intelligence-wise, as to what's happening on that squad. Then there is a strategic squad of intelligence analysts that sees the big picture of the office and is taking in all of this information, the classified intel stuff, national security reporting, and the criminal reporting. And that's how you see dots connected across the office in that cadre of intelligence analysts who see the 30,000 foot level. And by the way, it's not just overseeing what's happening in the office. Those folks are also connected nationally and internationally, reading the traffic every day and seeing the connections across the globe that apply to their field office.
Is this kind of the model of what the CIA uses because they have their analysts and then their officers? Is that how we've kind of developed our model?
We certainly we studied. I was part of this study. They sent a bunch of us over to the UK. We certainly looked at the agency, and we took best practices from everyone. The agency, a little more recently, under John Brennan, during his tenure, they changed their model in a very interesting way. So they work, and he writes about this in his book, which is called Undaunted. They went to more of a geographic breakdown so that they have a team that, say, works everything in Latin America or South America. And so they have all experts across all areas of their work: terrorism, intelligence, economic studies, and they get all together in the same unit and concentrate on one part of the world, no matter what their specialty is.
That makes sense. One of the things that, when I'm talking to people about the FBI, because I've taken that role in my retirement life, my mission is, of course, to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does. But I've always been confused as to the name Directorate of Intelligence and, of course, our National Security Branch. Those were terms that were developed again after 9/11. Could you help me fit those two things together with the Counterintelligence Division and the Counterterrorism Division? How does all of that work together?
Yeah, some good questions. I think, as you're pointing out, even career agents in the Bureau, as we were transitioning, were scratching their heads saying, what exactly does this mean? And so it's a great segue from what we just talked about, because that same concept in the field office, where there is this strategic analytical group that sees everything, the same goes for the Intelligence Directorate in the FBI. And the reason why they decided, in part, to name it Directorate and not Intelligence Division, because really, as you know, FBI headquarters consists of various divisions: counterterrorism, cyber, criminal, counterintelligence. But all of a sudden, they stand up something called the Intelligence Directorate. And the whole point is that they're not, quote, just a division. Rather, they have a need to see across the entire FBI. And therefore, they're more than just a standalone division. They are a directorate overseeing and driving the direction of the FBI, its programs, its strategies, its cases. But you've also raised another important topic that I think we need to talk about, which is when we say that the FBI is part of the U.S. intelligence community, and on any given day, we're talking about 16 or 18 agencies that call themselves part of the U.S. intelligence community. It also means, and a lot of people don't know this, that the FBI actually has not just a counterintelligence mission, but an intelligence mission. That means that when appropriate, and when it's part of the overall aims of the U.S. intelligence community, the FBI will collect intelligence for the sake of intelligence collection. So it's not just the counter intel mission where we're trying to catch the bad guys, the spies here, and work against them. It's also that, like the CIA abroad, that is taking in information that is of interest to the U.S. government, domestically, the FBI now will take in and collect positive intelligence that's part of a strategy for the U.S. government. And I think a lot of FBI agents of our tenure, Jerry, don't even understand. There are agents in the FBI who come to work at field offices, and their job is to collect intel as part of the U.S. intelligence community.
All right, you're going to have to help me with that, because I'm going to admit to you that I'm one of the agents who did not get a full understanding of that. And I know it's going to be hard for you to give us examples, but if there's some way to provide us a little bit more about what this intel is? Are you just talking about working with corporations that might be developing new technologies and knowing what that is so that they can protect it?
No, that actually sounds much more like a counterintelligence function. What I'm saying is this. The DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, oversees every year, actually it's updated throughout the year, a kind of shopping list. Think of it as a shopping list for the entire U.S. intelligence community. Here are the things this year, this quarter, this month, or in an emergency today that we need to learn as a government, that are priority collection targets for us as a government. So I'm going to completely make something up hypothetically. Let's say that a breaking concern is to figure out whether Vladimir Putin is suffering from dementia. I'm completely making this up. Okay. So obviously you say, well, that sounds like something the CIA would work on. Absolutely. You bet. Of course. But let's say that somebody connected to Vladimir Putin's healthcare, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's his former doctor, travels to the United States on vacation. That's a prime target to tell us, hey, is Putin sick? What's going on with Putin's health? So it would be the FBI partnered with the CIA that would do that interview and would learn what's happening as part of that shopping list for the U.S. government. Now, that's a very emergent example, but a longer term example might be what are Chinese plans and intentions with regard to Taiwan? Okay. Again, you might have someone traveling or posted, or a family member of someone here studying in the United States whose uncle is the head of planning for China on how they will attack Taiwan. Again, that could be within the realm of what an FBI agent would be collecting as part of that shopping list.
All right. And I think a lot of people are going to be asking themselves right now why that is not the job of the CIA, the agency. Why is the FBI involved in that collection of intelligence?
So particularly when it pertains to, there's an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. I was part of redrafting and updating that during my time as assistant director. There's an MOU that governs the relationship between the CIA and the FBI. And I can tell you particularly when it comes to U.S. persons, the American people understandably get very nervous when a spy agency, an agency that collects positive intelligence abroad, like the CIA, might be perceived as collecting against U.S. persons. So we draw a line there and we say, you know what, this thing here domestically, we need not only coordination with the FBI, even if it's a foreign national that you're going to interview, the CIA needs to run it by the Bureau because it's happening here. But if it's a U.S. person who has that information, we want the FBI collecting that. We get really concerned about this notion. And this goes back, by the way, to our earlier discussion of, hey, what about splitting the FBI? Maybe we need a domestic security agency. People get really nervous about the concept of, wait a minute, we would have an agency that kind of just looks at Americans and spies on Americans. Is that what you're talking about? So we delineate that, and the FBI has that role domestically.
Well, I can tell you, Frank, that there are people out there who are just as upset with the thought that the FBI is collecting intelligence and information on U.S. persons.
Yeah, this whole balance between civil liberties, free speech, freedom of association, and security needs is coming to the forefront, isn't it, right now, with regard to the topic of domestic terror. And, we need to have this national discussion about why we don't have a domestic, and I know you've had people on your podcast on this very topic. Why is it we don't have domestic terrorism laws? And a large part of that, Jerry, is this concern that once you start looking inward, you could immediately jump to abuses and excessive overreach. And, the worst case scenario now, Big Brother government is spying on your backyard barbecue because they think you're against the government. They can't differentiate between the guy sitting on his couch eating potato chips who's just spouting off on Twitter and never going to do anything, and the guy who's actually going to act out and hurt somebody. So there is rightful, valid concern here. And that's why there are so many rules. I know in your tenure and mine, we always complained about the operating guidelines, the AG guidelines, all of the rules and regulations.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And let me tell you, since we've left, there's even more burdensome rules and regs. And you know what? That's okay, because most of them are designed to protect civil liberties.
There's going to be people who are listening saying, hey, wait a minute. They jumped from talking about counterintelligence to talking about counterterrorism. But it is all interconnected, because we're seeing now that in some of this divisiveness on social media, when it comes to terrorism or intelligence, is being promoted by foreign adversaries. So it's all interconnected, isn't it?
Well, you brought us back on track really well. That was a nice save. And you are absolutely right. And this is what I think many Americans are simply missing, which is a lot of Americans have been duped into thinking what they think and doing what they do by foreign adversaries posting social media propaganda. Do you know that there was one point in the last 4 years where 250,000 people were following fake Russian intelligence Facebook accounts without knowing it? 250,000 people. And the most glaring example I can give you is there was a situation that's been attributed to Russian intelligence where in Houston, Texas, the Russians posted, and then they're pretending to be some other group. They said, we're going to have a black activist, black rights rally at this street at this time in downtown Houston. And then they simultaneously targeted whites by saying, hey, we're going to have a, pro MAGA, all of this stuff rally at this time and place. They were looking to start a riot in downtown Houston. And some people showed up. And it was completely fabricated. So, Bob Mueller, as special counsel, indicted 24 Russians, including 12 actual Russian military intelligence officers. What were these people indicted for? Social media propaganda against us and the 2016 campaign, and hacking into the Democratic Party. So yes, you can't tell the difference anymore between counterintelligence work, counterterrorism, cyber crime, and we have these stovepipes in the Bureau that thankfully are coming down. But let me tell you, the bad guys don't care at all that, this problem is worked by the counterintelligence division. That problem gets worked by cyber division. This problem gets worked by counterterrorism division. In fact, I would say our adversaries are exploiting our stovepipes because you can't tell the difference between programs anymore.
Wow. That kind of brings it all together. Now that everybody has a good understanding, even me, of what is going on, let's talk about some of the actual counterintelligence cases that you've been able to participate in during your career. So why don't we start with the first one when you were a brand new agent in the Atlanta division. That must have been a really exciting case because it's like right out of the movies.
Well, if you're speaking about the double agent operation that I developed along with a military service, this gets into the area of the different kinds of field offices when it comes to working counterintelligence. So Atlanta is not what we call an establishment office, meaning it doesn't have a diplomatic establishment like an embassy or a consulate. So it makes it a little tougher to find the spy in the picture because typically foreign intelligence officers, in part, operate under diplomatic cover out of an embassy or consulate. There are many different kinds of foreign intelligence officers, but that's one kind. In Atlanta, you don't have that big embassy or consulate. So you've got to draw out the adversary. And one of the ways you draw out an adversary is to develop a double agent operation that basically dangles or teases them into biting on something that they want very badly. You and I talked about a shopping list earlier for the U.S. government. Every country has a shopping list. And so if you dangle some item on that shopping list, I have a gallon of milk for you and that's on your shopping list, they may get really close to you and say, what kind of milk is that? How much does that gallon of milk cost? Because it's on my shopping list. And so that's essentially getting someone an American or other cooperator to be a double agent means they're going to be that person who goes to the Foreign Intelligence Service or is attractive to the service, and they're going to engage with that Foreign Intelligence Service on behalf of us, pretending that they're cooperating with them. And so as a young agent, I was able to develop that, and it was successful, and it was successful against the Russians. But as I say in the book, later on, I got promoted to headquarters and worked for a guy named Robert Hansen. And Robert Hansen later turned out to be the most damaging spy in the history of the FBI. And only later, after his arrest, and when everybody was figuring out what happened, did we realize that my double agent case, along with many others, was given up by Hansen to the Russians. And that finally explained, the light bulb went on over my head, why one day my double agent operation came to a screeching halt.
And then you also had a chance to look back at something that he had said to you.
Well, when I got to his unit at headquarters, he said to me, I've been monitoring your work down in Atlanta, and it's really good work. And I thought to myself, well, he's done his homework on me. He promoted me to headquarters. That's fine. It's a little strange that he's been watching my case file, but okay. Well, of course, what I now realize is he was giving up. He was looking for good Russian cases to give up to the Russians. And on a larger scale, Jerry, when those of us in his unit at the time at headquarters, when we heard he was arrested many years later, and we each started calling each other, it became clear that all of us in the unit had at one time in our career had successful Russian operations. And I wonder if he promoted us to keep an eye on us. He was suspicious of what we would be doing because our cases were given up, or he thought we were talented against the nation he was cooperating with. I don't know, but the man betrayed our country, our bureau. He was responsible for at least 10 deaths when he told the Russians who was working for us, and they executed those people. So it's a horrible case.
Yeah, I have had the opportunity to do an interview with Mike Rothford about the Hansen case. And what I'll do is I will drop a link to that episode in the show notes for this episode in case anybody wants to get even deeper into exactly who and what Robert Hansen did. Listeners have felt very safe in being able to listen to the podcast without feeling that I've taken any type of partisan or political stand. So this will be my warning for anybody listening at this point to skip ahead for a couple of minutes, because one of the most fascinating things that I read in your book was when you were talking about security clearances and who gets them and who doesn't have a security background investigation conducted.
Yeah, I get this question a lot with regard to, what I get is, hey, Frank, how in heaven's name did this president or this senator or this congressman ever get a security clearance when they've got such a questionable background? And it's a teachable moment for us, Jerry, because I have to remind folks that, hold on, elected officials don't get background investigations. It's part of our democracy. If you voted for this person, he or she is all yours. You got what you bought, and they get their clearances automatically because of their position. So a president, a senator on certain committees, any senator, quite frankly, who wants one. Same goes for House members, and particularly in connection, they may get advanced clearances in connection with a particular committee they sit on, and it's all done because we voted for them. It's not that because there's a background inquiry. And what I remind people of is the person who works in the coffee shop at FBI headquarters gets far more screening and vetting because they're in FBI headquarters than any president or vice president or any other elected official. And what I've written about in my column in the past is that we need to rethink this. That, in other words, we need a new way to vet a candidate for high office. And by that, I mean that we've now lived through a period of time, and no matter on which side that you come down on, but you have to concede that for the last 4 years, there has been a question about whether or not the president of the United States poses a national security threat. And the question is, how do we deal with this moving forward so that this question doesn't come up again? Because again, whatever side of the aisle you're on, you have to admit the last 4 years have been ugly. And wouldn't we like to mitigate the risk that some other candidate pops in where we have the same question all over again? So I'm not suggesting that, God forbid, the FBI do a background on a candidate and decide who gets in. No. What I am saying is that as a nation, publicly, we need more information than we currently get. so that we can be intelligent voters. And by that, I mean, I'm an advocate for mandatory disclosure of tax returns, financial and business records and entanglements, foreign travel, business interests abroad, including you and your family, so that we can make a far more informed decision.
I like that. And basically, you're saying just to have that information, make it available, and then the voters can decide based on that available information.
Yeah, I think the FEC could oversee the mandate and the public release and say, this person's complied or not, and the people can decide. Maybe the people can decide, you know what, if this candidate's not even complying, I'm not interested. I think we got to do this better. I view this kind of discussion, for me, as a security discussion, not a political discussion. As I've said, I want to minimize the risk that we ever have to have this discussion again about an elected official. And it's not that I'm taking a position one way or the other on the individual, but rather I'm saying we got a national security problem that we could possibly avoid in the future.
One of the other things that you talked about in the book is that we do think about counterintelligence work as just kind of the spy work, this kind of thing that Hansen did in Double Agents. But really, a lot of it is economic espionage. Could you talk a little bit about that?
This is really important because when the Berlin Wall fell and the world changed, although quite frankly, we're almost back where we started with Vladimir Putin, the FBI needed to really call time out, take a breath, and say, okay, let's take a look around at what we've not been able to do because we've so been intensely focused on protecting military secrets from Russia and others. Let's take a look around and see what's going on. And when we did that, Jerry, we determined that most countries in the world will spy on the United States when it's in their economic interest. And the realization came that, hey, it's not really all about the military secrets or even political secrets anymore. It's about what our companies are doing, their trade secrets, their research in academia, and corporate applications of those things. And here's why this is important. This brings it home to the American people, because now some spy game that takes place in novels and movies is much, much closer to home when you're talking about your job. The business you work at, whether it's a factory or a high-tech firm, they have something that our adversaries want. And if it walks out the door and it's a crown jewel or a trade secret that makes your company tick or goes right to your profit margin, you may actually lose your job. And it could be an existential threat to your company. We've seen American companies literally go out of business because they didn't protect their trade secret and it got stolen by a nation state. So the game is no longer a game. It's really about the economy. President Clinton's campaign famously, Carville, his campaign advisor, tacked a sign up on the wall in Little Rock, Arkansas for the campaign staff to remind them that, quote, it's the economy, stupid. That's the message they kept saying to get President Clinton to win the election. It's the economy, stupid. It is the economy, stupid, when it comes to the intelligence collection that goes on by our adversaries. In my career, Jerry, on this topic, I was this SSRA, the squad supervisor in a resident agency in Palo Alto, California. It was the only resident agency in the FBI dedicated exclusively to counterintelligence. And that's because it was responsible for counterintelligence in Silicon Valley. And every intelligence service virtually in the world was working in Silicon Valley trying to steal the computer industry secrets.
I would like to just spend a little bit of time talking about one of those cases which became instrumental to how we investigate these matters, because there was some resistance, wasn't there, with having trade secret legislation in order to be able to prosecute people with this.
Yeah, we are. We've talked about, the fact that we don't have a domestic terror law and we're having this national discussion about it. And let's draw the analogy to counterintelligence. Well, part of the job of the FBI is to kind of raise their hand when they see that there's a gap in the law. And in Silicon Valley, we saw that gap very brightly. And the gap, the realization occurred when we had a case where a guy named Guillermo Gady stole the secret to Intel Corporation's Pentium chip. Now, if you owned a computer back then, you had a Pentium chip in your computer, no matter what brand or model of your computer. Your computer was driven by Intel Corporation's Pentium chip. There was probably a sticker on your computer that said, Pentium. Okay. Well, he literally talked about old-fashioned spying. One day, he sits in front of his video screen, his computer screen. This is back in this is like 95, 98 is when I was in Palo Alto. But he sat there and with an old-fashioned video camera filmed his computer screen as he scrolled through the secret formula to designing the Intel Pentium chip. Then he tried to market it to foreign countries. Do you know, when we finally caught up with him, do you know the only statute we had to arrest him with was something called Interstate Transportation of Stolen Property, ITSP. ITSP was developed to deal with stolen cars. And so, and ITSP really comes down to it, as the prosecutors told me, when you're trying to figure out a sentence, what's the value of what this guy took? Well, what we were concerned about was that the defense would say, hey, the value of what this guy took was like a video cassette in his video recorder. It's $2.25 is what he did.
They're not looking at all of the research that went behind the development of this chip.
Not only not the expensive research, but the market value, right, of selling moving forward years and years ahead.
That's true.
What is this cost? What profit will be realized by the company for this? And you're talking billions of dollars. And there was no statute that recognized the gravity of trade secrets theft. There was no approved formula to say, this is how you calculate future market value. This is how you acknowledge research costs. And so that's what we arrested him on, was basically kind of a thing we use against car thieves. And so I got a call one day from headquarters, from Louis Freeh's office. And they said, Frank, we think you have the case that's going to be the one we go to Congress with and say, here's why we need a Trade Secrets Act. We need a federal charge that recognizes the gravity of stealing what makes a company tick. Can you please go around to Silicon Valley CEOs and get them to agree to come to Washington and testify before Congress? Now, here's the problem, Jerry. You mentioned some reluctance. Essentially, what I was being asked to do was go to these CEOs and say, would you mind publicly admitting that you've been a victim? Would you mind saying that you're getting robbed blind? And that, you risk your share owners, your board of directors screaming bloody murder that you've not been doing anything about it.
And your public perception.
Of course, right. And so that was quite the hand holding that went on. I was very thankful for the support of Zoe Lofgren, who still is a Congress member from Silicon Valley. She said, look, if you can make this happen, I'm behind this proposed legislation. I'll support it. And, it was a fine line, Jerry, because the FBI is not allowed to lobby for legislation, but we could certainly cajole CEOs into describing what they thought the need was. So ultimately they did. And in fairly quick order, Congress said, yep, there's a gap here. We need to address it. And now there's a two-part Federal Trade Secrets Act, or Economic Espionage Act. One deals with when a competitor or a civilian private citizen steals your trade secret, and that's at least 10 years in prison. But when it's a foreign nation and it's a spy that takes it, there's a heavy, heavy hit. And I'm thrilled that act is in place.
So everything that we've talked about today just really highlights the importance of having an agency that has fidelity, bravery, and integrity behind these concepts, protecting the security of the United States. And it also highlights the importance of that agency, those employees who work for that agency, having a code of excellence, because they have this highest level of trust for the nation. So why don't we talk about next those things that you developed in your book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, and break down those 7 C's.
I'd love to do it because the Bureau lives and dies by its brand and reputation, and most of all, its credibility in the American people's eyes. So that's the heart of my book, and I'd love to talk about it.
As we start talking, I wanted to remind everyone that during your time in the Bureau, you not only were the head of the internal disciplinary unit in the FBI, the Office of Professional Responsibility, but you were also a senior executive working as an inspector, inspecting different field offices and programs in the Bureau. And I wanted to read this paragraph that you have in the beginning of your book. You say that my inside observation perch gave me an opportunity to study patterns of conduct among high-achieving, ethical individuals and draw conclusions about why, when, and how good people sometimes did bad things. I also learned the strength of the system responsible for maintaining the FBI's historic lack of systemic corruption among a global workforce of more than 35,000 people in over 60 nations. During my time, less than 2% of employees were accused of misconduct in any given year, let alone found to have committed any. It's all a matter of perspective. And so I guess this book is really you gathering all of those things that you learned about why and when people do things wrong, and more importantly, why they do things right.
Yeah, I think you synopsized what the message of the book is. It's simply that the FBI operates at an incredibly high level of excellence under incredibly high stress because it's able to preserve what matters most. It's able to preserve its core values. It doesn't mean this book is claiming the FBI is perfect. In fact, quite the opposite. The FBI, as I concede, makes mistakes. And when they do, those mistakes are on the front page of the news or they lead the television news at night. And it's that kind of stress that requires them to get it right. And they get it right by identifying what matters most to the organization so they can protect what matters most to our country. And you don't have to spend 25 years inside the FBI to glean some of these leadership and performance lessons about preserving values. You can distill them down into what I call the 7 C's. And it's in the book called The FBI Way. I did, as you said, for periods of my time in the Bureau, I was privileged, I say both privileged and pained to lead kind of internal affairs functions. First, I was a unit chief, pretty young in my management career. I was a chief of a unit in adjudication, which is a fancy word of saying figuring out what to do with people who've been confirmed to have been engaged in misconduct. In fact, I led a unit that was responsible for the eastern half of the United States internally, having to make really tough calls, really good people who did some pretty stupid things, and having to figure that out. And then much later in my career, senior executive position as inspector, and then ultimately chief inspector. And for those with corporate backgrounds, you would know that better as a kind of an audit function in your corporate audit team, and learned a lot about what to do, what not to do. And as you said, why people do bad things. And I, good people, when you talk about good people, everyone in the Bureau has a top secret clearance. That means they've cleared an exhaustive background investigation. By the way, they go through that background investigation every 5 years, including a polygraph. It's as if they're being hired all over again. And there's financial disclosures and, really high standards. And so when someone like that commits some form of misconduct, and boy, it's pretty easy to commit misconduct in the Bureau because the Bureau it has lots of rules and regulations. You have to look at holistically why that person did it, whether there's rehabilitation. One of the 7 C's, Jerry, is compassion. And I tried to bring compassion to my decision-making in OPR.
All right. Well, can we break down the 7 C's? And if you could show us how they apply to not just the FBI, but, in any type of business or in someone's personal career.
Yeah, let's run through them because, it's not just that I thought of a neat memory device when I came up with 7 chapters, 7 C's. It's really that I spent a lot of time formulating not only what those 7 C's were, but what order they should go in the book. And so I deliberately started with the first C. The first chapter is called Code. And code is a word that simply means the conduct by which you want your team to perform, the rules that you want them to follow, because they reflect your core values. All codes come from core values. And the Bureau has posted core values. Employees understand essentially what the essence of those are. And I do consulting with companies, Jerry, and I walk into big mega corporations and they say, oh yeah, we have core values. Yeah, they're up on the wall somewhere here, and nobody knows what they are. And they never take a look at revising them, nor do they then move from code to a concept of the second C, conservancy, which is that it is a team sport to protect what matters most. Again, when I consult with companies, I so often ask employees, hey, who here at the company is responsible for enforcing standards and integrity and ethics? And they go, oh, we have an office that does that. They're on the second floor. That's the integrity office, or that's the audit team. And yes, the FBI has that. But far more importantly, the FBI ingrains in you from day one at the academy that you are a conservator, a steward of something much greater than yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. It's really an awesome responsibility. It's not somebody else's job to represent the brand and reputation and integrity of the FBI. So that's the second C. We start with code. We move to conservancy, which that it's everybody's job to preserve what matters most. And then we talk about clarity. So it's very nice to have a code of conduct. It's very nice to have core values. It's great to tell everybody they're responsible for the greater good of the team. But if you don't articulate what the rules of the road are, what you stand for, and more importantly, Jerry, what you won't tolerate in your team, then it's no good. So clarity becomes the third C. I give examples for each of these, starting with code. I talk about first day on the firearms range at the FBI Academy at Quantico. First time you fire rounds downrange and the instructor says over the PA system, move forward and score your target, that there's a trust factor from day one. You are expected to score your target accurately. And yes, an instructor is going to come by when you do qualifications, and they're going to make sure that, you've got it right. And there's, you're counting one hole as one hole, not two holes. But the reality is this is day one telling you you're it. We're trusting you to get it right. And that keeps going throughout your career. And even, this concept of conservancy, as you move up through the career ladder, like it or not, you're going to get assigned internal inquiries. And the higher up you go, the more tough those inquiries are going to be. And there's a realization that, holy cow, I'm actually going to have to investigate a colleague or somebody in another office or somebody in my office and expect to make a decision about what happened and get it right. And again, that's that enforcement of the conservancy code. You're not only responsible for you, but for that employee next to you and for the greater good of the Bureau and ultimately the nation. So clarity, and then we move to consequences. I think a lot of folks, and I've seen these folks in my management journey, when it comes time to really be a leader and maybe piss some people off.
Oh yeah.
That's when you realize. I've seen managers go, I can't do this. I can't bring this guy in and discipline him. Well, what did you sign up for? Did you think it was all going to be roses, and you're not going to do some things unpleasant? And if you're going to get it right, you're not necessarily going to be everybody's friend. And so this concept of consequences for your action. And one of the things I loved about the FBI is a different way to look at consequences, which is that the FBI tries to do the right thing even when the consequences are painful for the organization. I give the example of the time in the history of the Bureau where the FBI had a presence at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, with hostile combatant detainees. And I happened to be the ASAC over the terrorism program in Miami at that time. And Miami was initially responsible for the FBI's presence at Guantanamo Bay because we were 90 miles away. And I'll never forget the time when Miami agents who had just gotten back from Guantanamo came into my office in Miami and closed the door and said, boss, we've had to walk out of interrogations down there. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, there's things going on that we can't be a part of if we're going to ever prepare cases for criminal trial. And it's a long story. I share it in my book, but the FBI raised the flag in Washington saying, hold on a minute, there are things going on down there that maybe are okay in the military manual, but they're not okay if we're going to prepare cases for criminal trial. And that's what you've asked us to do, Mr. President. So what say you? And we caught grief from the rest of the intelligence community. That was not a popular thing to raise your hand about. But the FBI did it anyway, even though the consequences were painful. And ultimately, the right thing happened, and the Bureau was put in charge of high-value detainee interrogations.
And we have to add that, again, ingrained in these two agents were the core values of the FBI that allowed them to recognize, I don't want anything to do with this.
That's exactly right. These are what we call street agents, right? They're working cases. They're not necessarily in management, but yet they understood the bigger picture. They were conservators of what the FBI stood for and the mission. You can't sit in an interrogation where so-called enhanced interrogation techniques are being used and then think that you're going to be able to testify that this was a free, voluntary confession from somebody. So, yeah, they did the right thing. The FBI does that every single day. I give a similar example of a horrible case. Sometimes in law enforcement, as you know, Jerry, people will say, hey, what's the worst thing you've ever heard or seen? And I don't even like those questions. I never ask them. But one of the worst things I experienced was things that I've heard, not seen. And one of those was a tape recording of a so-called honor killing in St. Louis, Missouri, where the FBI had a FISA court-ordered microphone in the kitchen of a family because that mother and father were part of a terrorist cell under investigation. Well, one day the translator on that microphone coverage comes into work, plays the tape from yesterday, and realizes she's listening to a murder taking place in the kitchen of that home, where in the mother and father, as part of a Muslim honor killing, were killing their daughter, their teenage daughter, for dishonoring the family. And the FBI had to make a decision. We had a great terrorist cell investigation, secret microphone. We could keep that secret and move on, maybe quietly tip off the police that, we think we know who murdered the daughter. But we had to wrestle with the Bureau had to wrestle with destroying that investigation by coming forward, declassifying the whole case and the microphone surveillance. And that's what they did. They did the right thing to bring justice to that young victim, even though the consequences were horrible for the investigation of the terror cell. So it's that kind of thing that means preserving your values. I think the FBI does it very well. The other, close out the C's, the 7 C's. From consequences, we move to compassion. You can't just have code enforcement, preservation of values by algorithm. You can't just set up a computer that says, oh, if this agent did this in violation of our code, then we spit out this discipline. There is a precedent database. Of course, that means there's fairness and there's adherence to precedent. But the human factor can never be taken out of that. And so I lost sleep some nights wrestling with what to do with really good employee, but found to have committed some code violation.
I would say that this is the only one that gives me some type of feeling that there could be some wiggle room. There could be some implied biases that are believed to be feelings of compassion for one person that aren't for another. And, I just wanted to be honest and mention that because, sometimes there's compassion for one person who's done the same thing as somebody else that for some reason that compassion is not felt. Do you understand what I mean?
Oh, I do, because wiggle room does allow, just as I said, the human factor of compassion can also masquerade as, it could also hide the human frailty of bias or prejudice. And so I'm proud to say that in OPR, there is actual rigor around the compassion factor. Here's what I mean by that. In every analytical report in adjudication, where you're laying out the precedent, you're explaining the findings of the investigation. You also have a mandated section called mitigating factors and aggravating factors. So you have to actually, in legal analysis, you have to say, here, and there's a formula to it. Here are the mitigating factors. This agent has been a successful agent with the following performance appraisals for the last 20 years, blah, 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 blah. And then aggravating factors. This agent's done this twice before. He or she has a horrible performance record. There's no remorse being shown. There's a formula to it that hopefully doesn't completely negate the possibility of feeling one way toward, feeling differently toward different people. But it gets harder when there's actual sections in a report that have to be honestly and accurately portrayed. So we move on, the remaining couple of C's after compassion, we move on to the all-important C of credibility. And as we've talked about, it's all about credibility for the FBI. There are agents knocking on doors right now across America, flashing FBI credentials, many of them trying to stop the next act of domestic terrorism. And if that citizen at that door has to pause for a moment and say, you know what, I've heard some negative things about the Bureau, especially the last 4 years. I don't know if I'm going to cooperate with you. I don't know if I trust you. That's a huge problem, not just for the Bureau, but for the entire nation and national security. So also imagine trying to develop informants, maybe in a public corruption case. Someone's going to share information about a very powerful, corrupt politician in the county or the state. And they don't know if they can trust you with that information. They're looking at retaliation, maybe in their job or business. And again, it's all about credibility. So the chapter there says, look, credibility is not being perfect. Credibility simply is about being passionate about getting it right. And when you get it wrong, being transparent about that, owning up to it, being accountable, and then telling us what you're going to do to fix it, and then doing it. That's how you build credibility in any team or organization. As a leader, if people think you're not, walking the talk, you're not going to have any credibility. And that's even true on a national level for the FBI. Lastly, the last C, I deliberately chose it to end the book, is the chapter on consistency. And I chose consistency to end the book with because I think it offers hope for the future of any organization, but even our nation right now. I get asked a lot because I'm on TV. I'll get stopped in the supermarket or someplace. Sometimes even, I have a mask on and people still see who I am. Hey, Frank, they say, how are we going to get through this mess? Our country's in a mess right now. There's got to be some different ways to look at this. Maybe we need a new political party or we need to change our democracy. And I look at them and I go, my lessons from the FBI were that there were unprecedented challenges all the time in the Bureau. And the higher up I went, ending with assistant director, there was a crisis a day somewhere in the world that we had to deal with. And what we didn't do was say, oh, we've never seen this before. It's unprecedented crisis. We need to abandon our protocols and training and the way we handle things and figure out something else because, we've never seen this before. And I remind people of a couple things. One, our nation's been through a civil war, Vietnam War protests, presidential assassinations, presidential impeachment, violent periods of time. And what we can't do is abandon the principles that got us here. The rule of law, the Constitution, 3 equal branches of government. Now's not the time to say there's got to be some new way. And the FBI, what they do under crisis, and I talk about the time that I was the on-scene commander for the anthrax murder in Boca Raton, Florida. What we could have said was, we've never seen this before. We've never had an anthrax murder in the history of the United States. We've never sent an evidence team into an anthrax-filled 3-story, 60,000 square foot building. And by the way, this happened less than a month after 9/11. Instead, what we said was, is this a crime scene? Yes. Are we really good at crime scenes? Yes, we are. Is it a hazmat scene, and have we been trained in hazmat scenes? Well, yes, we have. Okay, so this is a crime scene in a hazmat environment. That's how we're going to treat it. Again, clinging consistently to what got you here, what your values are, what you're trained to do will get you through almost any crisis.
On this podcast, I have pledged never to be political or partisan, but I recognize that there may be people listening to this that are saying to themselves, but, and so I do want to talk about, what happened in 2016 and the fact that some people believe that the FBI, stepped out of their role and took a political stance. I don't want to get into it too deep, but I just want to at least acknowledge that there are people who feel that way.
So I'm with you on that. I similarly I see my role on national television with NBC as simply trying hard to be the neutral explainer and not getting caught up in political discussions. And in fact, there are times when I turn down an appearance because I think the discussion's going to go political. There are others in our very polarized society who simply say, Frank, if you're on NBC, I don't even want to hear from you because I get my news from other sources. And I think that's part of our problem is we're all in our own echo chambers. But here's the thing. The fact that we're even having this conversation is troubling because the last 4 years have caused many people to perceive the FBI as somehow political. And that is perhaps the worst thing that could ever happen in terms of perception of the FBI. Why? It has to be the neutral fact finder. It has to be perceived as the objective fact finder. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think collectively we'd say that our experience has been that agents don't come to work and stand around the water cooler talking about politics.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
We talk about our kids, what we're doing this weekend, sports, but everything but who we voted for or what's going on in Washington. But the reality is, and I say this in my book, that some of the fault in the Bureau being perceived as possibly political came from our own leadership. And by that, I mean, I think Jim Comey is an incredibly ethical, well-intentioned individual. I still think, in terms of the 7 C's, he may have gone sideways with regard to this concept of being a conservator of the Bureau's values, meaning thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead. If I have a press conference and I say and make an announcement that, quote, no reasonable prosecutor would ever prosecute Hillary Clinton, in that very moment, he is, in a sense, politicizing the FBI. Why? The FBI director doesn't make prosecutive calls. So he may have made the right call, but it isn't his call to make. And we're all accountable to somebody. He was accountable to the Attorney General of the United States, but he took that decision away from her for whatever reasons. I understand. But then he handed President Trump a reason to bash the FBI for the next 4 years, fire the FBI director. And the Bureau's going to have some time that they need to come back and regain public trust.
I totally agree with you about how he caused the perception of the FBI to change, because as a former FBI trained spokesperson, I did that for the Philadelphia division for 5 years. I know what the FBI talks about during media press conferences and what the U.S. Attorney's Office talks about. And they talk about prosecutions and we talk about investigations. And so I can tell you, watching that initial press conference, my mouth was open because, that wasn't our job. But that does not mean that the FBI is political, but the perception, unfortunately, got out there because of that.
That's exactly right. And I had the same reaction. I still remember watching that press conference and my jaw dropping. And, I like to say when I was SAC, I was the special agent in charge in Cleveland. If I had called a press conference and announced that, quote, no reasonable prosecutor would ever prosecute the county commissioner, I would have been removed from my position. And the first person on the phone would have been the U.S. attorney saying, what in God's name has Frank just announced? So, yeah, the rules have to apply to everybody throughout. And yes, on the topic of the difference between perception and reality, let's remember that the DOJ Inspector General found that moving forward, that the Russian inquiry, which many people perceive as politically motivated, was actually properly predicated. There was a reason to do it. There was a reason to get a special counsel involved. So, it's perception versus reality, but sadly, perception becomes people's reality.
Right. I agree with you. And that's not why I had you on the show. I had no idea whether we were in agreement, but I do believe that the intentions were pure and that people that may no longer be in the Bureau were asked to leave, also known as fired, not because of any type of corruption, but, and this is going to be a strange way for me to put it, but I think you'll understand, but because they violated the major rule of the FBI, and that is, do not embarrass the Bureau.
Yeah, I do get into this in the book. And it was painful for me the decision to include such quote unquote political talk in the book was a tough decision, but I see it as not political talk. I see it as preserving the core values of the FBI. So I actually do mention, for example, the termination of Peter Strzok, who was the Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. It's not that there was any finding that he was politically motivated in opening or running his Russia inquiry, which led to the special counsel, but rather I knew instantly as the emails and communications between him and Lisa Page on their bureau devices, by the way, became public, where he, as senior executive, was talking about the very case he was supervising in political terms and biased terms. I knew that he would have to be terminated. And I said that on national TV. And I took a hit from a lot of my Twitter followers, about 420,000 of them, who said, hey, never speak ill of anyone who is trying to do the right thing. And I go, nope, that's not right. He's damaged the Bureau. And if he isn't fired, the Bureau will never be able to discipline anyone at a lower level who does the same thing.
Yeah. Unfortunate. I don't know him, but, that's the reality of the FBI's core values. They were violated and there were consequences.
Exactly.
All right, Frank, we've gotten to the point of the episode where we get to learn a little bit more about you. Now, I have already read your bio, so listeners are already aware of the unbelievable career that you had. And the fact that you rose to the level of assistant director of the counterintelligence division. But I'd like to go all the way back to the beginning and find out when you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI.
Sure. I tell the story in the book about being 11-year-old kid in Connecticut and kind of growing up in the New York media market where I saw the FBI New York division taking down mob families. And then a steady diet on TV of FBI shows where, they were solving every crime in an hour or less, including commercials. And I said, boy, this looks pretty neat. And, while other kids maybe were talking about being an astronaut or a firefighter, I wrote a letter to the SAC and FBI in New Haven and said, hey, I'm 11 years old. What do I need to do? And he wrote back to me and, gave me some information and everything. And that stuck with me. I think I was raised in a family where there was a real sense of justice, that there is wrong in this world, that there is right in this world. And of course, we all know that as we get older, the world is far grayer than we think when we're a kid. But that appealed to me. And so I figured out that back then, lawyers and accountants had a leg up in getting into the FBI. So I wasn't into accounting and I decided to go to law school. And I did. I became an honors intern during a summer in law school, which, by the way, is an awesome program. If any listeners have young people in their lives who might be interested, this is a paid internship in the summer at FBI headquarters. Back then, it was like the second year of the program. There were only 16 of us. And I was either the first or second agent hired out of the honors internship program. Because I was in law school, they assigned me to the general counsel division. And I got to see everything going on in the FBI from that position. And I was thrilled to come to work as a student at FBI headquarters every day with the flags flying on Pennsylvania Avenue. I thought it was pretty neat. I finished up law school, processed in as an agent. And it's been a wild ride. They took the Connecticut Yankee and stuck me in Atlanta, Georgia for my first assignment. And that was a cultural difference.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was. But you know what? I moved all over the place. San Francisco, Miami, Cleveland, Washington 5 times. I wouldn't have had it any other way. It's been an adventure.
So when did you retire?
I retired at the end of August 2012.
All right. And if people don't know, again, I read a little bit of your bio, but what are you doing now?
Yeah. So after I retired, after 25 years, and by the way, 25 years of trying to get back home to Connecticut. And my parents were in ill health. My brother, who lived in Connecticut, was really taking the brunt of caring for them. So as I get retirement eligible, General Electric Corporation comes knocking and says, hey, you've been protecting the nation's secrets. How about protecting our secrets, our trade secrets? How about heading up investigations and insider threat for us? And lo and behold, their headquarters was in Fairfield, Connecticut. And so it was a chance to not only work for a great company, but to go back home. So
yeah, nice.
I took that, and I'm glad I did. I spent 5 years there as a corporate security executive. And for the past 3 years, I have been a national security contributor for NBC News. And I've now appeared, rough count, about 1,000 times on television, just trying to explain national security to people.
All right. And I do want to just mention one more time that your excellent book, which I read twice because it was it's a condensed book, but it's packed with a lot of stuff. So I had to read it twice to really decide what we were going to talk about today. But that book again is The FBI Way Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. And it is excellent. So I always give my guests the last word. And you have so many words of wisdom about the FBI, so it might be hard for you to decide, but I give you the last word, Frank. What would you like to say?
I'd like to remind people about something we already talked about, which is that last chapter called consistency. Everybody's feeling a lot of angst. Even mental health therapists tell us that there's record-breaking demand for people who are suffering from anxiety because of the political situation. Families aren't speaking to each other because of politics and polarization. Social media is kind of completely out of control at this point, and people wonder where we're going to go. But I chose that last chapter of consistency because I think if we cling to our values personally, as families, as communities, and even as a country, we're going to get through this. We may look a little bit different at the other end, but we'll get through this as democracy. But each one of us has to preserve the values of our democracy.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a couple of photos of Frank Figliuzzi, as well as a number of articles from the FBI website on the National Security Branch and the Intelligence Division. There's a link to the FBI Retired Case File Review episode on the Robert Hanssen spy case, along with other episodes related to espionage and intelligence matters. Of course, there's a link to Frank's book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I would also love it if you checked out the link for my books in your podcast app's description of this episode. My nonfiction books, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, which goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And then there's the companion book, FBI Word Search Puzzles, Fun for Armchair Detectives. My FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad crime series features flawed female FBI agent Carrie Wheeler in Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. All of my books are available wherever books are sold as ebooks, print books, and audiobooks. If you've already picked up copies of my books, please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.